Well, okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas, and we are so happy to partner on the Big Texas Read with Gemini Inc. And tonight, Alexandra Vandekamp, the Executive Director of Gemini Inc., is going to be moderating tonight with the 2020 Texas Poet Laureate Emmy Perez. I do just want to thank really quickly some of our partners. Lone Star Literary is a great website here in Texas that notifies of all things literary in the state of Texas. So if you're looking for bookish news, bookish events, check out Lone Star Literary. The University of Texas San Antonio has been really generous in their support, the library system, getting the word out about the Big Texas Read. And then our partner bookstores in Terabang Bookstore in Terabang here in Dallas, and the Twig Bookshop in San Antonio. So we have been just so heartened by all the support we've gotten from around the state, and that we've been able to have great author conversations like we're gonna have tonight. So if you have questions throughout, put them in the chat window, and I'll be monitoring that. We'll open it up at the end for a Q&A. And let's just have fun. And I'm gonna hand it over to Alexandra Vandekamp, Executive Director of Gemini Inc.
Hey everyone, it's so great to be here. And this is one of the best parts of my job. One, collaborating with a great organization like Writing Workshops Dallas and with David Samuel Levinson, and just doing this kind of statewide virtual book club. And even though we're going through this incredibly difficult time, and Emmy, I thought you were expressing that really well, there is kind of something comforting about everyone being just a Zoom away. And so I'm so glad that Emmy was able to join us tonight kind of effortlessly because of this technology of Zoom. And I'm gonna just read a little bio, which won't do her full justice, but I wanted to give a little background about her. So I apologize, I'm reading right off of a Word document, but here's a little background. Emmy Perez, Texas Poet Laureate 2020, is the author of With the River on Our Face from the University of Arizona Press and Solstice from Swan Scythe Press. A volume of her new and selected poems is forthcoming from TCU Press. Originally from Santa Ana, California, she has lived in the Texas borderlands for the past 20 years. The first 6 in El Paso, where she has family roots, before she moved to McAllen, where she currently lives. She's the recipient of a 2020 Poets Laureate Fellowship from the Academy of American Poets and a 2017 National Endowment for the Arts Poetry Fellowship. A graduate of the University of Southern California and Columbia University, she is a member of the Macondo Writers Workshop and was a Canto Mundo Poetry Fellow from 2010 to 2012. In 2017, she co-founded Poets Against Walls Collective. In addition to university teaching, she has also taught creative writing in high school alternative programs, community settings, and detention centers. Currently, she is a professor of creative writing and associate director of the Center for Mexican American Studies at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley. And she has had such an abundance of praise about this book of poems we'll be talking about tonight, With the River on Our Face. So I can't possibly quote all of them, but I'll quickly quote 2. The one and only Sandra Cisneros has said of this book, in divided times, Emmy Perez's voice speaks not only from America, but from the Americas, North and South, a wise healing poetry. And then Luis Alberto Urrea has also wonderful praise and says, Emmy Perez is a word musician and magician. This book has a powerful pull. It has secret places where part of you will reside. It is a good season when a book like this is in bloom. So I just wanted to take that to fully welcome Emmy to the Big Texas Read. So welcome, Emmy. We're so psyched to have you here.
Thank you for your work putting this together.
So what we usually do is we kind of throw it out and throw it out to our audience. Does anyone have a poem request for Emmy? So we first like to ask our just anyone who's attending, if there's a first poem you would like her to read. If so, you could just put it into the chat box. Or unmic yourself and just blurt out the title. Okay, great. I love that poem, Robin. Hey, Robin. It's so good to see you. Can you read that?
Yes, I
Rosalia?
can. And
Yeah, that's
so,
such a great poem.
yeah, thank you. Just to forewarn you, if I sing a line, I'm not a great singer. If you plug your ears at that point, that's okay. So if anybody wants to read along, if you have the text, it's on page 20. And so should I go ahead and begin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for any of you poetry nerds out there like me, I really love the ghazal form. Aga Shahid Ali, the late poet, brought the form to us in English. And so there are plenty of ghazals that you can see in English all over the place. And so in my first collection, Solstice, I wrote a ghazal that was pretty much following all the rules. And this one, I started to write one and then I kind of broke the rules. And so once you see, when I get down like midway on the page 20, you'll see that it starts to veer. Okay. And also so ghazal, and then I was playing with ghazal lion because it's so big. Downriver Rio Grande Gazillion. Drive into the valley past a field of old farm equipment. Near the tip of Tejas, Sal de Rey, blatant farm equipment. I never bent into onion fields or declined sweet strawberries. The kid in everyone's kitchen escaping farm equipment. When I think about seeing you, I want to jump on your back. I confess, you're sexy, luxury. Let's paint farm equipment. The color of parakeets congregating, squawking on 10th Street McAllen power lines, strip mall trees, fading equipment. 99-cent meals, surreal pickles like vine fetuses in jars, wrinkled weenies on a stripes treadmill, saintly farm equipment. Julia, te necesito. ¿Dónde estás? En el barrio de nuestra nostalgia, en el Rio Grande de Loíza. Let's weld, jade, cave, excavate, equipment, repatriate shell and bone, shards and kernels, study Hopi, dry farming, dare Roman Empire, Incan terrace farms, Aztec chinapas, Mississippi cotton, California strawberries, seedless watermelons, grapes. Cherries still need their pits, suck and spit them like chew. Sometimes I defer to the blues, tejanas, two chachalacas, rustling at Evanos and Evanos and chachalacas. Rio Bravo, Grande, caracoles, snails, both spiral galaxies. Aga Shahid Ali prayed for each couplet's own identity, sin fronteras, linked by rhyme, refrain, y su nombre de diosas y colonizers. Snake, bobcat, great horned owl, paraque, bats, tacuache, medicine. Burrowing vato owls protect their land, urban EPT, El Paso. Return to rivers, loves, monte, El Chalan, no border wall, no border wall. Erase citrus, the so-called fences. Faith in Boca Chica, Gulf of Mexico, fresh saltwater confluences. Salt is older, older than cranium. What's older, salt or water? It's time to move beyond binaries, old loves. Remember eyes, not love, but eyes, eyes or love. Yes, remember the smell of skin. Go swimming. El día que tú naciste, nacieron todas las flores. The scent of water, a tolerance for ambiguity. In Napantla, between hurricanes Dolly and Alex, flooding. Terremoto, huracán, lithium, the grass, mineral, metal, leaf cuts the ants clip and carry, ant path, goat, sheep crossing, Rio Grande Gorge. Quote, it takes hours to defang cactus. You nursed an orange all of Christmas Day. At night, just before going to bed, you ate it, end quote. A tilde marks your open text unions. Sign your name with the tilde in email. Fill your flirty ambiguity like a friendly besito. Okay, so I'm really, I know that it was like another poet who chose this poem because this is really a poet's poem and it leaps all over the place. And so for those of you who might not always read poetry, you might be like, what? Why is that? What is that poem leaping all over the place? So thank you so much, Robin, because I know you're an amazing poet, and that's a poet's poem.
Do you want to explain with just quickly what a ghazal is?
Yes, and so sure. Like if you have the book in front of you and you look at page 20, so I don't know, and I'm assuming that I did try to maintain a syllable count. And so usually what a ghazal does is there are couplets. And so in the first stanza, you set up which word or words you're going to repeat at the ends of the line. So you'll notice that I have farm equipment and farm equipment repeated at the ends of the first two lines of the couplet. And then in the next line, the next couplet, I just use farm equipment in the second line of the couplet. And then you'll see that farm equipment is repeated until I start veering from the form in the second line at the end of the couplet. And then there's also rhyme that appears right before the repetition. So blatant, I mean, I was kind of like messing around with rhyme. Blatant, farm, paint, escaping, I'm sorry, blatant, escaping, paint, trees, saintly, and then I stopped choosing the rhyme. And so in those sections, it was pretty much the same syllable count, and you choose the syllable count. And then at the end, usually you use in the last couplet, you use your name. Some people have cool names like Rose, for example, and then you could use that like the actual flower. And in my other ghazal I have in my first book, I use my last name Perez. In this one, I just talk about names. I didn't really use one of my names. And I have another draft of a ghazal somewhere else where I think I used, because I remember when I was in middle school, I once had somebody say, Emmy's after you, and then Emmy who? Immigration. And so that was not a nice kid to me. And so I put that in the couplet of, the ending couplet of another ghazal that I have not published. So I don't know if that explains it, but then you'll see in the middle of page 20, I just start saying, I don't want to do it anymore. But also something else with the ghazal that's really cool that I think is really fun for poetry, people who like poetry, is that each couplet, the way that Aga Shahid Ali explains it, has its own meaning in and of itself. And so each couplet could have a different mood, a different feeling, a different topic. And the thing that links it is the repetition of the end word or phrase and the rhyme. And so you'll see that I kind of started like just following that idea of leaping to idea. And so, yeah, I was just thinking associatively, and that's what I really love doing in poetry and why I love poetry more than, for example, writing an essay. Like essays are too logical, things like that. Although I love logic, I love reading things that have logic in them. My mind just kind of goes off in different directions. And I also added some words, and so when you hear me reading tonight, you might say, well, that's not in the poem, because if you look at my copy of my book, I edit things after it's published, and I add things, I change words. Okay, I haven't been looking at the chat. Is there anything?
Well, so what we'll do is, that's a great explanation, actually. So it's almost like the ghazal starts, the ghazals continue in your poem, Emmy, but they're just exploding. They're like exploded couplets. That's pretty great. So what we usually do, we have some great questions that we got from some of our attendees to the Big Texas Read. Some of them are emailed ahead of time, or some of them are put right into the chat window. So I love this first one from Bethany Reed. Bethany, do you want to unmute yourself and just ask this great question in the chat box about toggling back and forth between English and Spanish?
Sure, thank you. Ms. Perez, thank you so much for being with us tonight. What a delight.
Oh, thank you.
Your work is just, I love your work. And
oh, thank you so much.
And you do what so many of us who've grown up on border states, right? We toggle back and forth with English and Spanish. And I certainly grew up that way in Texas. You just always sort of mixed Spanish. I mean, I'm from an Anglo family. English was the predominant language, but just because of how we lived. We just mixed that. As I grew older, even more and more of that, toggling back and forth. And, you know, with all the talk about cultural appropriation and, you know, just some things that we're all reading about and seeing, and there seems to be confusion. And I'm right in the middle of a short story right now. And, you know, one of my characters she just goes back and forth English and Spanish. She's an Anglo character, but that's just who she is and how she goes. And so I've just been wondering, am I veering into dangerous territory? Are we getting overly, you know, what's the balance here? How does that strike you?
You know, I think it depends on the piece and how it's being used. You know, I myself don't consider myself to be completely proficient in Spanish, like many of us growing up, you know?
Yeah.
You know, and so, but I mean, if you feel like the character, it's true to her character and you're saying that that's how you grew up, I think that would be very interesting part of that character to know about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, for me at least, I always try to find really good readers who can help me with my manuscript before I submit it for publication or before I publish it, and just try to get people to read it and to see if it's working or not. And I think that, you know, just sort of a case-by-case basis to see. I don't know, I understand how you feel because, you know, I too struggle with feeling like I'm appropriating. And sometimes I don't write about certain subjects, and I know I haven't in my lifetime because I feel like, oh, that's not my story to tell. And so I think it's good that you're asking yourself these questions because, I mean, there are some ethics involved, but if this is who your character is and you do it well, I don't think anybody is going to complain. Cormac McCarthy, I know, uses Spanish in some of his books, and I just think that it all depends on how well somebody pulls it off, right? And so, right. And so that's why I think getting a reader can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just in general on cultural appropriation, you know, some of the criticisms out there, you know, and some of the things that you see and you read, it's almost as if it's almost as if you can't write characters that aren't what you've personally lived as a writer. And that seems like it's taking the pendulum too far to me. I don't know. What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I mean, you're writing fiction, right?
Oh, I am,
So,
yes.
yeah, so I mean, I think with fiction, you have a lot more leeway. And again, I think it all depends on how the person pulls it off. And so, yeah, but I think you're asking some really hard questions and it's frustrating, I know. I know when I lived in New Mexico for 3 years and I was working with predominantly a Navajo and Zuni population teaching high school equivalency classes, I hardly published any work during that time because I was so afraid, even though I lived there, that I would be appropriating the land and everything. And even like my mom, who's a kind reader of my work, said, how come you have like 3 years of your life missing in your work? And I was just terrified because I didn't want to seem, but now that I'm older, I can see how there are ways to do it, right? As a poet, I'm not thinking as a fiction writer, but as a poet, there are ways you can write about it where I am not like assuming to know what it's like to be a member of the Navajo or the Zuni Pueblo or the Diné Nation. I wouldn't feel comfortable myself doing that. But I could write as a witness. I could write as a witness to what I see and to make my position, and this again is poetry, it's different than fiction, to make my position very clear in the work itself. You know, even in this collection, I think sometimes I'm kind of self-deprecating and I say and I don't, and when I say I in the book, I also think of poetry as fiction as well. I give myself, you know, the leeway to change things and alter facts and let my imagination go where it might. And the I character could be different people. But I also, at times, I think I'm like, El Paso isn't, there's a poem where I say El Paso isn't mine, El Valle isn't mine, I don't want anything to be mine, because I am aware that there are certain people who say, oh, but you didn't grow up in these places, so how do you know what you're writing about? And so I completely understand the feeling that you're feeling. And so, but again, in poetry, you can say those things. I don't know how to handle that in fiction.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that there's sensitivity readers that you know, save your money, and, you know, it doesn't cost a whole lot of money to find an editor who can do a sensitivity read of your work. I know one here in the Rio Grande Valley, so if you ever wanted to get in touch with her, I could. She's great. Mexican-American, Chicana, here in the border. And, you know, pay somebody a little bit of money and they'll read and they'll give you an honest opinion. And I think that's really the thing that, the way to go.
Yeah. It's
Hard question.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Hard question.
I mean, these are great questions about, you know, just the process of writing. And thanks, Bethany, for that, because I think some of the things you're saying are really interesting about writing what really seems, making sure you're being authentic in the best possible way, and what's really your material. I think we're always asking ourselves that question, right? But I loved, so I thought we'd kind of also give you, Emmy, just a few more questions for people that pre-submitted before today. And they kind of veer off some of the questions that Bethany was asking about language. So David Levinson, one of our co-founders, has a great question. David, you want to read your question that you wanted to ask Emmy?
I'm going to wing it. I'm going to paraphrase, okay, because I don't have it in front of me. I was reading your book. I love it, by the way, and I'm really happy that you're here. I was noticing in some of the poems that you switch, or you go from lowercase to uppercase and uppercase to lowercase on certain words. And I was curious as to why you chose to do that. I think it's interesting. It reminded me of E. Cummings, of course. So I'm curious about that.
Okay, I wish I remembered which one so that I could talk about one in particular.
It's in El Paso.
Okay, there we go.
I love that poem, by the way. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. So, yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I remember at the time that I was writing this book, I was even signing my name with the lowercase letters in email. And, you know, I don't know, there's just something really, and some people still do that. I think it was kind of a fad for a while. And then I don't know if some people are still doing that. And I think that it kind of just gives a softer feel to it. Like, it doesn't sound so loud in some way. And I feel humble writing my name in the smaller letters, especially when I'm emailing somebody that, you know, not at work so much as maybe somebody who's a friend. And so let me take a look at this poem again to see. And I remember when I was going through the copy editing stage, you know, I had a great copy editor who was like, you sure you want this to be lowercase? And I remember having to say, yes, I do. And so I'm trying to see where, if there's an example. If anybody knows of an example, please let me know so that you can refresh my memory.
I think it happens. I mean, I have your book from a Kindle, so.
Oh, right. No, here it is. I found it. This is,
okay.
So if anybody has the book, it's page 18. In the second stanza, I say, in the middle of the stanza, El Paso of every city in the Americas. And I used a small a. And I don't know, I just felt like I didn't want Las Americas to be so dominant. You know, I'm very like sensitive to the idea of these places being colonized. These are like colonized lands. And so for me to use the small a felt like I wasn't giving it so much power in that example. I'm trying to see another one.
There were more. I'm looking at the poem right now. I just remember remarking to Alexandra about it. Where is it?
Sometimes I say El Valle, which is the Rio Grande Valley, with small letters, and I don't know if it's in this poem, but another one. And then in this one, I put big letters, capital E and capital V. And so even it depends on the poem.
But I like that your choice of whether to use a capital letter or a small letter, like there's intention behind it. It's like the feel of the word is different depending on whether it's capitalized or not. And that's so poetic. That's so like such a poetic move. Like the physical look of the word matters, right?
Yeah,
So,
because I feel it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure, you know, I'm sure you do, but I love that. I love that choice.
And so even with the title, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, her Mexicana mother and Tejano father, usually those adjectives.
Right.
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 Yes.
So in in that place, I just didn't want it to stand out so much. Like to me, the information that was being related, I didn't want those words to be what people are staring at longer. And so it depends on which one. And so just like, I didn't want it to de-emphasize
I love that. Yeah, that's
because
great.
I thought it would be distracting, but you could just know just enough, and then that's enough that you need to know without like lingering on it.
I love that. No, that's great.
And so I had to like, when I was doing the editing again, sort of defend each of them. And even the title, I wanted the O to be a small O. And they said, oh, we've been like really good about, you know, the other ones, but with the title, we need you to make that a capital O. And we went back and forth about that because I felt that was too loud. I don't know. And so, but I gave in, and it's a capital O. They convinced me.
They convinced you.
Good question.
I was just very interested in that. I'm looking if there are any more instances, but maybe there aren't.
I think that's a great, just a great, interesting discussion about small letters versus capital letters.
Yeah, I love the idea of like softening the word and not making it so loud. I think that's fascinating. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I was thinking of Lucille Clifton's poetry, and so much of her poetry uses a small I. It doesn't really use a lot of capitalization. And yeah, I was able to take a class with her once, and it was very influential. But even looking at her poetry now, I can see how powerful it is that she sort of decentered the I with the small I. I don't really do that so much in this collection, I don't think.
So is poetry sort of an erasure for you?
In this collection, I do have several poems that use erasure. I don't think I'm going to be doing that so much in the next collection, simply because, and I'm going to say why. I mean, you'll see I have like copious notes at the back of the book. And so I hope that everybody, if you read it, will see that there are notes. But for example, if you take a look at the poem Gone Downriver on page 17, if you have the physical book, there's a little note underneath the title that says "with text by Clarice Lispector." And about half of the poem is my words, and then the other half, I found a section of her work which is in prose, and I erased several of the words. I really like to do that, especially I don't know why. And so if you look at the end of the book, you'll see the actual text that it came from and how I don't know if that's what you mean by erasure, but that's what I was thinking of, is paring it down even more. Like, how dare I pare it? Like, she's a brilliant writer. Like, how dare I pare her work down even more? But that's how I don't know. I look at a thing and I want to pare it down even more to make it different in some way.
No, it's great. I've never seen anyone use Clarice Lispector, so I love her.
And it's in translation, of course. And so, and so the thing reason why I might not be doing it so much anymore is because in a couple of book reviews, some people were quoting some of the text that's a quote without and attributing it to me, which horrified me because, you know, I thought I had nice notes at the end, but I don't think everybody's reading them. And so, yeah, I didn't want that to happen anymore. And some of them are like in italics. And so some of the parts that I quote are in italics, but if you don't read the end, you might not know that those are not my words. So, but that's a good question.
Thank you. Sheila, the amazing Sheila Black adds to it in the chat window if you want to sort of address that maybe, or maybe not. It's just
Oh, I was just really, I love to use other texts as well. And I kind of feel, well, one thing, I don't know what he wants me to say because I wrote a lot, but I was really struck with your capitalization, that it really shows how tonally different even changing the capital letter is. And it can be intimate or declarative just by that capital letter. And I really felt that, and I loved that. But I feel like the erasure is kind of about this border of other voices always kind of entering a little bit. I was curious about that. And also wanting to honor other voices. When we were talking about appropriation, I always have, you know, it gives this nice, like, sense of you're hearing them, but you don't hear them all the way. And there's something about that I feels really true to this work that's so focused on this land of passage. I don't know, David, was that the comment you wanted me to talk? I was interested in asking, since I did have a question, I think that I love in so many of your poems how land and people kind of, the images associate between land and people. We see that in the river in her face, or even human things and natural things like green light. And that was very striking and original. Do you know what I mean? There's this sort of, almost like this glide from you'll be talking about birds and then it's something man-made and then it's birds. And I thought that the way that green light, there's nothing about a light, but we get the light as well. So I was kind of interested in you talking about that. Because I really,
you know, I was thinking about this poem today. The Green Light Go, is that the one that you're referencing? Yes. So if anybody has the text, I think it's on page 26. So I was really thinking about this poem because I haven't been able to go out very much and I've been staying home, and I was thinking about how re-entering my work and this conversation with you all and looking through the pieces again really helps me remember like how much I love the physical world. If it's a green light and seeing the green light, I remember I was seeing it in Corpus Christi and taking a picture of it, and I said, oh, I want that green light thing go to be on my book cover. And I even made like a little handmade chapbook with it on there. And so I just feel like when I moved to this side of Texas after living in El Paso for 6 years, so much of my coming to know the land was by visiting it, and you know, even storefront windows, and you know, being excited by a silly green light in Corpus Christi. And so I think it's just, you know, whatever caught my attention is I'm going on all these travels and the physical world, and how does the physical world affect us as human beings in a sensory way. And everything that I have in this poem, most of it were things that I saw or felt. There's even a line about to be a kid in juvie. And I was at the time teaching here young people, detained young people in a juvenile detention center. And, you know, just sort of thinking, wow, like what would it be to not be able to go out into the physical world and see all these wonders. And I'm a very visual person. And so it's kind of hard for me to not be out and about, to see things to write about and to feel and to like experience that in the world. But even without COVID, I have been, you know, writing work that is more interior, that is more like not playing off of the physical land as much, because now I have small kids and I can't, like, if I take them with me, they're talking and we're talking, I can't think. So, but I'm really glad that you mentioned this poem, because I was thinking about it today, and it is a list poem as well. And so it's kind of listing all of these things and imagining what would it be like to be these things. And it was like a poem of happiness and a poem of excitement. And so I like this poem for that reason. I don't know if I answered your question.
Can you read it, Emmy? We'd love you to read it.
Okay,
Would you mind?
sure,
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Green light go. To be a disco ball dangling in a storefront window in the sun with a cage on it. To be 2 and 3 disco balls, downtown McAllen, spangles of sun and water that grew tangerine skins late February, pink bottle brush nostrils, buff-bellied hummingbirds. To be mirrors and hexagonal combs, Mexican honey wasps, larvae, paper wax. To make geometry without vocabulary, to be live music. Take off your jacket, girl, wear your tank top, it's 90 degrees. To be a green light go, downtown Corpus, after cars and trucks zooming on beach sand before hot tubs. To be an orange sun driving from Anzaldua's grave. To be a cactus bloom fuchsia, a puncha, Laguna Tascosa, Laguna Madre. To be a watering hole, a mud chimney air vent for crawdad water tunnels. To be a silver lizard run over by tires, a swatch of river on asphalt, to be a bolt loosened from the border wall, to be a beso falling out of the border crossing's revolving slot, to be a Coke bottle dove, a Mexican Coca-Cola, a cooing quorum of loteria cards signing a resolution. To be a goose perched on top of an abandoned sink in a yard, in a town that fords the river, to be the woman stretched on her beloved's grave, returned after decades, to be a kid in juvie, to be her guardian, the judge, the probation officer, to be the letters she writes, the words that matter more than food, almost as much as music and more than makeup, nearly suns seen through the mandatory skylight, imagined by the control room monitor. To be El Chalan, the last hand-drawn ferry on the river, its ropes pulled by pilots, to be a passenger almost on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Woo, that's great.
Woo.
I wish I could do all this stuff again.
So beautiful. I know.
It was so much fun. We will get to.
So great to hear you read it. Because I kind of felt like what was so great is it's associative, but it takes us through this very specific landscape. And by showing how you're related to everything around you and kind of this imaginative leap into being all these things, it becomes kind of an argument against all these lines and borders without, and it's really beautiful. I love that poem.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate it.
No, thanks, Sheila, for just bringing up those great questions and having Emmy read this great poem. I wanted to just dive in because it's kind of related, and I'm just going to ask one question, and then we'll continue with a lot of other questions that we have here. But I noticed just the sounds of words in your poems about like place names, names of flora. As Bethany was saying, this wonderful, just almost like Spanish words almost melding into English words effortlessly. Like, for example, your Boca Chia, Playa, Baghdad has all this great repetition, and the words start morphing and breaking down. So one, I'd love you to read that poem. And two, you want to just talk about how you were thinking about repetition and the sounds of words when writing this? And that's probably a big question, Emmy, sorry.
Well, which one comes first? The repetition answer? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was writing this book, I was really thinking about a number of things. I was thinking about the chant, and I was thinking about Maria Sabina, who was a Oaxacan curandera. And they really didn't know, I mean, she was a healer. And so she would, take the magic mushrooms. I don't know what they're called. I didn't do that when I read this book, but that's what she did. And she would heal people with her chants. And so the anthropologist came in and, recorded her in her native language, and then people translated into Spanish and then into English. And so I just thought if you have a chance to look up some of her work that's online, her chants, they're really interesting. And so she uses repetition in such a way, and it kind of like leads to a revelation. And I thought that was very interesting because it reminded me of the blues poem, where with the blues poem, you have the repetition, and then there's the third or the second line is usually after the two things are repeated, a revelation. And so I was kind of doing that with some of this work in my collection, where as before when I was writing poetry, it was all in my head. And in some of these pieces, especially the first poem, And It's You, I was actually speaking it out loud and trying to hear the way that I talk and the way that I would chant without drugs or without mushrooms. But and so I don't think I did that with this poem. Oh yes, this one I think I did. I never read this one out loud. So yeah, this is on page 23 in the book. And I remember that this one, I think I recorded as well as a first draft. And so now that we have phones and we have I think I had back then a little recorder, and I was just recording myself and doing a little fun experiment. So Boca Chica, if you travel along the river, it'll lead on this side to Boca Chica Beach, and then the other side is Playa Baghdad in Matamoros. And so it's the same, it's just the river is in between them, and then there's two countries on either side. And there's hardly ever anybody on our side, except like you and a friend and a border patrol agent. But then on the other side, there are all these people usually like fishing and having fun. And so here it is. People on playa, none on boca, Chica Beach, except us, to touch the river mouth. Washed up chocolala cartons, caguama bottles, muddy swirls. Boca Chica, Chica's boca, chiquita boquita, boquita es muy chica, muy chiple. Chica boca, boca chica, chica 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 chica, boca boca boca, boca chica, boca chica, boca chica. Use Carrizo Reed to measure how deep El Rio sinks before the confluence with the Gulf. How deep are we before confluence? Water has no age. When you said you read poetry like Bible verses, I stopped being suspicious of the world. So, yeah, I was thinking, has anybody heard the word chiple?
Yeah.
You have?
I mean, I had to Google it, I have to admit, because I know some Spanish, but that's not a word I was familiar with. Does it mean like spoiled?
Yes,
like,
my mom used to call me that when I was growing up all the time. And I haven't really been able to find a lot of other people here that use that word. And I wonder if it has indigenous roots. I don't know. Has anyone else heard that?
Emmy. It's from the Nahuatl.
It is, huh?
Chipil, chipil. It means spoiled one, but it's because when the mother is expecting another baby, then the one that she has becomes chipil. He wants to be close to the mother. That's the terminology. I'm from Nuevo Laredo originally.
I remember you. We met
Yeah,
you.
from El Paso.
Yeah, I remember you. Yes.
Yeah, and that's it's now, I think it's Nahuatl, from the Nahuatl, but
That's what I thought.
my mother would always use, ay, está chipil, because
Yeah.
su mamá está esperando. The mother is expecting another baby, so this baby is chipil, and so that's what it means.
Orquídea, you too use chipi? Orquídea?
I use it all the time. Well, my kids are not little anymore, but we use it also. Está chipil, está chiflada,
Oh, chiflada, yeah. I hear chiflada here.
For some other reason, but that, I think that was the original. I might be wrong. I'm not an authority on Indian, or Nahuatl.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like chiple. I always thought it was.
Not chiple, it's chipil.
Yeah.
Not chiple, it's chipil.
Right. Yeah.
Chipil. Chipi is chip.
So when I was using that word, I was just using what my mom called me. So,
and I think probably it has to be with an X.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. But
yeah.
We used it without the L at the end in Reynosa. So yeah, we used the chipi. Also when like you talked in like a baby voice, so like when little kids started to act more like babies, they would be chipi. They were sounding chipi.
I've never heard chipi, only chiple. But I love hearing like sort of the regional differences.
Yeah, well, it is from the Indian, so we are not sure.
Yeah.
It might be with an X, it might be with CH.
Right.
Might be chipil. En Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, it was always chipil, P-I-L, and that's how my mother and everybody that I know used it. But again, because it comes from another language, there's the variations. That's the beauty of language, that it has so many variations.
Well, I love this whole discussion on slang.
But it's not slang. No, it is.
Okay. Okay.
The Nahuatl, a lot of our words come from Nahuatl. Tomatl, aguacatl, sopilotl, guajolotl. All those are from the Maya. Never to be slang. No. It's just the Spanish took them because there was no guajolote in Spain. I mean, it was originally from Mexico. So, it's not a slang at all. No.
My grandmother always said guajolote, but then when she would say pavo when you were going to eat it.
But it's, that guajolote is the original one.
Yeah.
Then when they took it to Spain, they thought it looked like a pavo real, like a peacock. And that's why they called it pavo. But really it's waxolotl. And so that's the original. Yeah. And then the South America, I think it's cocono. It's different because of the language. Yeah. Yeah, I've been a Spanish teacher 49 years, so, you know.
Yeah, the etymology is great. That's very interesting.
Yes, and I love etymologies and, you
Yeah.
know, we're just, I've studied a lot, you know, in my 49 years.
Thank you. Yeah, and also like caguama bottles. I mean, I always understood those to be like 40 ounce or those big bottles of beer, but it also means like a tortuga, right? Like a
And, well, and it has another meaning
turtle.
because there's a very popular song that from Argentina that a girl is walking by the beach with her caguama. And in my Zumba class, everybody would say with the caguama. And I said, I don't like this girl drinking with a beer. You know, I mean, it didn't go with the song. So I looked it up. I was taking lexicography or whatever. I went for a PhD at College Station and I had it, whatever, origin of words. So I went to the Argentinian and it means a bodyguard. Her boyfriend was, you know, muscular. It's a muscular guy, a big guy like Caguama. It's a big turtle. Caguama is the biggest turtle.
Yeah.
It's not just a turtle. It's a big 200-pound. And so, and then the beer is the biggest beer bottle that you can find. So, and in Argentina is the, you know, a muscular guy, you know, that's taking care of her boyfriend or whatever. And I came to my Zumba class. I said, no.
I love this like word discussion. It's great. So I'm gonna actually, if you don't mind, I would like to just ask a few more questions from people that submitted questions before tonight. And it's kind of Wyland submitted a question. Wyland, are you here? Do you want to unmute yourself? Your great question about Emmy's endnotes.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, hello. I was so interested in your endnotes. I'd never seen such so many of them. And so it's so interesting reading the poems and then going back and seeing the influences. And so I was kind of wondering, like, you know, when I'm writing poems, like, I don't really know what my influences are a lot of time. And so I was just wondering, like, what's the process for writing the poem? Are you approaching it kind of like research, so you know where you're gathering all of these threads and these references?
I think that that's one way that I wrote some of these poems, but it wasn't like the research was intentional. Sometimes it was in the middle of writing. Like I had the idea to write something and then I thought, for example, maybe if I look at a Border Patrol manual, it will help me to write a poem. And so I have like a quote about, and I think that's in the poem Rio Bravo Grande. Yes, where this is on page 39, where it says the following immigration officers who have successfully completed basic immigration law enforcement training are hereby authorized and designated to exercise the power conferred by section 287A of the Act to use deadly force should circumstances warrant it. And I think I remember with this piece, I knew what I was going to write about, and that kind of helped me. I wanted to know a little bit more about that, and so that in that situation, I looked that up. It caught my attention, and then I kind of riffed off of that. And so there's like a repetition later in the piece where I'm talking about should circumstances warrant this and that, and that's talking about a time when a Border Patrol agent killed a young man. And so, yes, on page 44, I borrow from that language. Should circumstances warrant detaining a youth running back home? Should circumstances warrant thrown rocks, pulled hair, stay here, pulled trigger? And so in that situation, but in other cases, usually, I mean, even with that poem, I knew what I wanted to write about and the research kind of helped me a little bit. But in other ones where I'm quoting other poets, I'm just like a big fan of their work and I love it so much and I want to like love it more by including it in my work or being influenced by it in some way. Yeah, so, or sometimes I'll write a piece, for example, the one about the Anzalduas Park. Oh yes, this is the one that begins upon Obama's presidential, the really long title. And then I mentioned that Anzaldua's, it was not, oh no, not that one. There was another one where I mentioned something about Anzaldua's bridge, and I found out that it wasn't named after her. And then somebody in a conference actually said, it's probably named after one of, like, her family, because she has family members and they could be related, but I still didn't feel like it was like named after her. And so because after I read that poem, somebody in the conference mentioned that, I felt like I should write a note to show that I looked it up and that it's not named, it's not called the Gloria Anzaldúa Bridge, which would be so cool and amazing. And so I wanted to put that in there. So it just depends on which poem it is. And if you had a question in a particular one, or, okay, so I'm looking at page 93, and I make reference, I was talking about Anzaldúa, to her short story and her poems that use character Prieta and Prietita. And I was just writing, reading her work at the time, and I included some allusions to these characters. And I wanted to make sure that the people reading the book would know what I was talking about. And so I thought, oh, a little note might help them if they wanted to look that up more. So, you're just reading something, you're influenced by it, it appears in your work, and then I added the notes. I don't know if that answers your question. I think each one.
But yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'll read something from somewhere and, it's not really referenced where it comes from, or it's like just italicized. So it's cool to be kind of your influences and references, and also seems like super ethical too.
Thank you for reading them, because as I mentioned before, I think sometimes people don't read them, and then it's not understood all the way. And I think I was most influenced to do this by Claudia Rankine's book. I think it was published in like around 2007 or 2008, and it's called Don't Let Me Be Lonely, an American Lyric. And it's like a collection of lyric essays, prose poems, and she's really famous for writing a book called Citizen, and that came after this book. But with that, and I remember teaching it, and I just loved reading the end, like I was engrossed in the endnotes, because I read the whole book before the notes. And then when I read the notes, I said, oh, this helps me understand everything I'm reading even more. And I don't think my notes do that so much, but I just remember falling in love with notes with that book.
And what was the name of that one again?
It's called Don't Let Me Be Lonely.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a long book, because there are these like prose poem lyric essays, and they're really, I like them a lot. They're really good.
I mean, it's interesting that you're so inclusive, because wasn't T.S. Eliot notorious for just like adding Greek and then never translating it? And like, do you have any thoughts on T.S. Eliot?
I mean, I do like a lot of T.S. Eliot's work, especially the Four Quartets. It's a very beautiful book. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, I think every time I hear people talking about, well, why do Latinx writers use Spanish in their work and code switch? And, some people say they can't understand it. And then I've heard other people say, well, T.S. Eliot did that. And so, nobody ever like complained so much about him. And so I did, I do think that nowadays, especially, we could have our phones right next to us. And even with Eliot, we could just kind of do a little Google Translate and find out. But I'm sure before that, it was frustrating if you didn't have the proper dictionary at home.
Wasn't his reasoning more like this to the reader?
Yeah, somewhat, absolutely. And I think some people do have that feeling about it. When that happens, I just skip over it. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna deal with that part. It's not important enough or something. But I do remember having friends who said, well, you might want to include a glossary for some of the words in Spanish in your book. And I decided against doing that because of the times that we live in. And I think that people can sort of really quickly, if they really want to know, look it up. And even one of my friends who speaks Spanish says, well, I don't know what a jaguarundi is, and I don't like the names of animals. And I said, well, it's super easy just to look it up, and then you can see a little picture of it. And
but it's also but it's also another way to connect with the work. It's like hypertextual.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You bring the word to you basically, and you learn it and you never unlearn it, which is great.
No, I love that. Thinking of it as a hypertext. Yeah, that's cool.
No, I loved, just to chime in on that, David and Emmy, looking up like all the great names of birds and plants and animals in your poems, like the chakalaka, and you're repeating, and that's like such a great sounding word, you know? So that was, yeah, that just seemed like an added layer to the reading experience. But I am an EndNote nerd. There is a luxury that you gave us all of that great information at the back. I really enjoyed that, Emmy.
Yeah, I was just typing, thank you for doing that work if you were looking up all the
Oh
birds.
no, I thought I enjoyed it. It was great. Because I speak Spanish, but I lived in Spain a long time ago. It's a bit rusty these days. So some of the words I know, but some I don't. I like the carrizo, that reed, and that keeps coming up in your work, you know. So I just loved learning them, and just the sounds in general of all your words are so great. And the poem seemed to really revel in that. I'm going to ask one quick question about the tilde. Is it the tilde? I always butcher that.
Yeah, I think it's tilde.
I love how you use it. You know, I'm going to try to show it on my screen here. I'm butchering it, but well, no, it won't work.
Tilde.
I knew I was doing it wrong. I love the geographic look of some of your poems, and the tilde is so great because it looks like a little river. And I did nerd out a little bit and read a great interview in Literary Hub, I think in July of 2017, and it was with Araceli Germain, and she had this great question. Do you mind if I ask it? I'm going to kind of shamelessly steal it because I think it's so great, and then we'll definitely let other questions continue from here. But she talked about, you have that great poem called Each Person on page 64 that's like one line.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to read that poem? And then I'll just say a little bit of the rest of my question after.
Okay, sure. Let's see, 64. Okay. Really short. Every person, every ant path, every mosquito shell peck is a river. That's it. It's very short.
Well, I love that. It's almost like a formula that you embed in your book, and it's a logic you want us to think about. And I just love this idea of, so I'm shamelessly stealing this question from Araceli, but it's so great. Like, what do you think of rivers, and has your relationship to rivers and rivering changed since that 2017 interview, which is probably right after this book came out, right?
Yes. Araceli is a brilliant poet.
Yeah, no,
so that was really a gift. I mean, I felt like I should have been interviewing her. Interviewing me. How did I respond?
I mean, you said some amazing things about how we're all rivers. Like you said, even like the mitochondrion and DNA like has a rivery aspect to it. So just this idea of expanding this idea of riverness. I mean, this line does it. Every person, every empath, every mesquite shell peck is a river. So I just love how you're making us think of that. That's all.
No, thank you. And I was thinking of Linda Gregg has a great essay. It's called The Art of Finding, and you can find it on poets.org. And she talks about how we have resonant sources that we carry with us. And they're not necessarily the subjects of poems, but they infuse our poems and our work with, and she doesn't use the word spirituality, but you know, that's how I kind of take it. Like in this case, I use my resonant source, which is the river, as a lot of the subject matter of the work. But you could also think about a river and write a poem that has nothing to do with the river, and it could still be sort of the thing, the lifeblood that's underneath the writing of the work, is how I understand how she uses resonant source. But so the river, I moved to El Paso in the year 2000 because of my mother. She grew up there and her father's family had lived there for a long time. And I always grew up listening to her stories, talking about, you know, growing up near the river, growing up near a canal. Her mother would always say, don't you all go in the canal. And as soon as she went to work, they jumped in the canal because it's dangerous. And, you know, my grandfather would siphon water or steal water. It's so that they could grow some plants so that they could survive. And so I always think about how, in that way, about how I wouldn't exist, because my mom always talks about growing up very hungry. They were very poor. My grandmother had 10 kids. She always counted the stillborn, but there, you know, ended up being 9. And both of my parents grew up very in deep poverty. My mom in El Paso, my father in the California borderlands. And so when I think about how, like, my mom talks about those times, she always talks about them with so much love and so much excitement. And so to me, like, to move to El Paso and to move into that neighborhood was really amazing. That the adobe house that my grandfather built is still there. They don't live in it anymore. And just to know, like, I mean, that's why I live, is because they survived. I know that's dramatic, but I'm a poet. And so when I was thinking about, you know, the idea of rivers, and when I moved here to the Valley after living in El Paso, I was just so amazed that you could see the river so beautifully. And this is like in 2006, before there were border walls. And it was the same year that George W. Bush signed the Secure Fence Act into being. And so, you know, as I'm going up and down and seeing these beautiful places along the river, and enjoying sort of the natural life that is along the river, and how so much of that land is no longer. It was just heartbreaking to see the erection of these border walls from 2008, 2009. I just didn't believe that it was going to happen. I was used to living in El Paso with fencing, and the river just looks like a little trickle at times. And, you know, there's concrete, but here I was green. I said, oh, wow, it's being replenished by different tributaries, and even the Rio Conchos in Mexico. And so, yeah, by the time I moved to the Valley, I thought even differently about the river than I had when I lived in El Paso. It was more, I don't know, I could touch it. In El Paso, you couldn't really at the time where I lived anyway. And then so I traveled up to Colorado, and I went to the sources of the river. And so that's in one of my poems. And of course, I'd lived in New Mexico and had been seeing the river for many years. Even though I lived near Gallup, I would have to go to Albuquerque whenever I traveled. And it was just fascinating to me how it could be replenished in so many different places, and how it is really the lifeblood of so many communities for such a long time before any Europeans arrived. And how it used to be wild, and now it's been so tamed and endangered. And I mean, you asked me, do I think of it differently now? I think I do, because the last poem of the collection is called Not One More Refugee Death. And, you know, I look back at my poems in this collection, and I wonder if, you know, the honoring of the river as this, you know, ecological wonder, lifeblood of communities, it's also like a very sad space where people die all the time. And so, you know, there's other poems in the collection too that reference that. And so, you know, we've all seen the images of, unfortunately, like last year, the father and the daughter who were trying to cross here in the valley in Matamoros, and they didn't make it. And they're very like iconic image, which is very disturbing to look at, right? Of them, you know, it face down in the river. And so, yeah, when I look back at this collection, I feel a little guilty that I had so many privileges. And I think that's apparent in some of the other poems too, such as the one about, and that's based on a real experience when I got pulled over by the Border Patrol just for looking at the river, is, you know, this idea that I have all this time, like I used to before I had kids, to sort of visit the river and be in these natural spaces that were very beautiful, though militarized. And, you know, there's people living in an encampment in Matamoros and seeking asylum, and it's taking forever. And I've visited that encampment, and it's very, so, you know, and then they can't wait any longer. Or some of them send their kids across without them, or some people take the chance to cross it and they're dying. And I've always known that, but yeah, so when I think about rivers now, I think of it in a different way. And there's so many more walls now too. And they continue to be built. The whole land has not been covered with them yet. But even, there was a private group that came and built a wall in Mission, Texas very recently. And, it's still beautiful to see it, but it is a very complicated, militarized land. And you can't ignore the militarization, as much as you want to try, you can't, because that would, there's a lot of birders. And so I have another poem in the collection where I'm talking about birders who just come and they don't really, they might say, oh, good, there's the border wall, and not really, make the connection between people and the land, and just, they want to come see the birds and not so much the whole of it. And so, yeah, I think it's in there, but I think now I feel it even more. So,
Yeah, that's
especially
really
with family
beautifully
separation.
said, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, Emmy, continue, sorry.
I was just going to say that, like, some of my new poems are about family separation on the border, and 2 years ago, like, all of that happened here. And I wrote this book before this recent president, and so all of this was written prior. It was published in the fall of 2016. So now I have other work, and I thought I was being like really blunt and bold in this, and I think that the next collection, it might be different. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No. I love hearing you talk. It's great what you were saying. Could I ask you to read a poem, because your comment has made me think of that poem. It's your very first one in the book. It's your opening poem, and it's
you. Sure.
Because I think it does this wonderful job of kind of what you're talking about, all this it's almost like a catalog of these of the animal life and the ecological wonders, but then there's also these other observations that talk about the more violent history. And I think that might just be nice to hear after what you just said, Emmy.
Okay, yeah, so there's a line towards the end that talks about violence, and I am sort of referencing the state-sanctioned violence that has happened in these lands for hundreds of years at that moment, just to make that clear. And this is another piece, this is one of the pieces that I spoke into a recorder as a first draft, and I was trying out those repetition to try to find a revelation. And it's you, it is you, I know it's you. It's you and you and you, not one, you. You in the bee, you in the leaves bitten, you in the bitten leaves, you in the holes, in the bitten leaves, in the absences, in the leaves, you in the absences of the leaves, of the leaving, you in the absences, you here, you in the acrylic smell of carrizo, in the wind, in the tree trunk, you in the red ants, you in the dirt dome, you if I look up, you if I look down. If I sit on the tree trunk and feel the earth rumbling below through the roots, because the wind and river waters stir the roots to stir below and below, somewhere deep beneath, then I know that it is you and you are earth, and the earth is nothing more than you. And you are the dragonfly with dotted wings, you flying into the leaves, the branches, the upright branches, upright, you are upright. You in the spaces between the shadows of the trees on this dirt road, you in the shadows and spaces, in the shadows and snowflake spaces, in the branch shade, you in the burnt sugar depths, you. 30 hawks flying over the river, earth cupping water, wind blowing river in the opposite direction, sun lit up river, sun white silvers the river. Is this what it's like to feel you as water, carrizo swaying water, struggling upstream in the sun? Is that you in the 1,000 silver rivers? What I meant to say is that a long-billed thrasher didn't fly away. What I meant to say is that I am not you, I am not you, not you. I don't mean to suggest that we're the same. We're not. That's why I like you. It's vampiric the way the mosquitoes bite. It's vampiric the way they find and bite only me, it seems. It's vampiric the way that I am thinking about you. A braid of berries spat out with seeds and chapulines, scat out seeds and chapulines. A braid of rat fur shat out in a gray braid. And I smelled the pile of bobcat scat, and walked over chalky gray feathers, chalky gray feathered mouse, mouse like scat, mouse transformed into kids. Feathery feathers, and it leaves a chalk stain, an outline of a chalk stain, and then a turquoise dragonfly flew right over my head. A bright turquoise dragonfly flew right overhead. Red dragonfly, red cardinals, red damsel, red ruby spot, chachalaka, chachalaka. Tree branch in the road thought it was an indigo. Tree branch in the road thought it was an indigo. Tree branch in the road, I thought it was an indigo snake. Blue winged dancer, Kiowa dancer, rain pool dragon damsel. Whole rats shat out, whole rats flattened, flattened out. Yes, whole rats, whole little cotton rats. What I forgot to say is that violence passed there, blood spilled there, blood spilled here. Red dragonfly, little hawks, little hakal, little mud house, blood spilled there. I said violence, violence happened here. A pile of seed berries gone straight through a coyote, javelina, fox, raccoon. I wanted expired, expelled, expired, expelled. I want earth to expire it and extol something new. You, 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 you. And then there's a little bit at the bottom, I never read that.
That was so beautiful hearing that. I just thank you. It has that really, when you were talking about chants at the beginning, it has that really incantatory quality. So there's nothing like hearing it out loud and hearing you do it and read it, Emmy. So thanks so much for that request.
No problem.
I mean, there's so much, there's a lot of questions. I think we only have about 12 minutes. Time's flying, everybody. So I want to kind of open it up and see if anyone would like to ask Emmy questions. I have a few more questions that were pre-submitted. So yeah, people can ask about the writing process or anything that Emmy's gone through, just whatever they want to have a discussion about before we close.
Alexandra, this is Sylvia.
Hey,
And I have a question for Emmy. I love that last poem. It's beautiful. You're so talented with how the words that you come up with and the placement. And I love your writing. But specifically in that poem, when I read it, in fact, I read it 2 or 3 times. I know this sounds silly, but who is you? I thought at first it was me, and then I thought it was God, and then I thought it was just you, the writer. I was kind of confused. I didn't know where to go with that. Sorry.
All of the above. So I think that's a really good, thank you for reading the poem more than once, by the way, and thank you for your attention as I'm reading it. But I think you asked some really great questions because, you know, I could tell you about what I was thinking about when I wrote the poem, but I think what's more important is the way that you're receiving it as a reader and also now as a listener. And I do really believe that when people are reading poetry, that you're sort of co-creating the experience with me. Like I'm giving you part of it, and then your experience of it is the other part, and that there's really like no right answer. And so I know that when I hear the word you in a poem, I think it's a very like intimate sort of like address, right? And so you do feel like, oh, you know, you feel like you're talking to me. And so I love that. And you said, God, I love that. What was the other one? The writer?
I thought, well, the writer, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that one when I was writing it, but I was thinking about multiple people. And so when I was writing the piece, I was thinking of a person, and then it changed into different sort of beings and people as it went along. And so it was a very interesting, transformative experience. And again, I was speaking the first draft of it and sort of playing off the world while I was feeling all. So, you know, I came into the poem, and I'd like to think of Garcia Lorca, you know, like having all of this emotion when you're writing the poem, and I felt that. But I was also like playing with this process of repetition and being in the world. And I was in the land, really close to the river at Santana National Wildlife Refuge when I wrote this. I was actually riding my bike. I was riding my bike and I had a recorder and I wanted to write and I couldn't because I was riding my bike. And so I knew that I needed to speak. And that was the first draft. But yeah, the you changes throughout, and hopefully it has a feeling of multiplicity and that you can't really tie it down.
So it could be a number of loved ones. You could be a number of loved ones.
Sure. Number of loved ones, and I don't know, even people who are reading the piece, you know, when I think about at the end, I want Earth to expire and extol something new. You. I could be talking about writing or whatever what's going to come next in the book. And so this poem is like very deliberately placed. Well, when I wrote that, I didn't have that intention at all. You know, I don't know why. We don't know why we do these things. It's just very mysterious, honestly. And it's not always intentional. But as I was thinking about how to order the poems, I thought that that was a really good way to say, okay, now here comes the book. And this is the preface. And I hope I'm going to do something new from what I did the last collection, as we poets are always trying to do. And but you know, I hope it doesn't only mean that. That's not what I intended it to mean. But when I was putting it together, that's what I thought of, that I thought it would be a nice way. Like, what is this thing I'm writing? What are these things that I'm writing? I want it to be something new for me.
Well, thank you, Emmy.
Yes. But also I think, I just want to add one more thing is like, you know, one of the people that I was addressing had just died. And so I was thinking about that, like you know, when people go, they're still here. And so that's how the poem sort of begins. And even at the end, like, what do we do when our loved ones die, and how, but there's other people in the poem too, but I don't want to like give away all my secrets.
No, actually, I was thinking about a lot when I read that piece. So great question to ask. I thought, is it a lover? But then it's kind of this absent present you. And then of course I did feel like, okay, this is kind of resonating off in so many different directions. I don't think it's meant to be, I'm not going to try to nail it down.
Right. But that's great. Love that.
But that's great that you were saying it was, you know, about a recent death, and there was, so that's interesting just to hear that backstory, Emmy.
Yeah, so that's what started it, but then it turned into a living person, and then other things and creations and just life itself. Like I was literally looking at, you know, coyote and animal poop on the floor and saying, wow, like it's just you know, thinking of the cycle of life and thinking about what happens, and, you know, just sort of wondering what we're all doing here. Why are we all here, and what are we doing, and how do we experience the world, the physical world and the spiritual world, and our feelings, and within the context of history and place and time. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's not just one person. And it's so cool if you thought, oh, it's me. I like that too, because there's an intimacy with using you that I love in poetry. Unless somebody's shouting at you, it's like putting their finger in your face. Well, maybe not. Yeah.
So that's beautiful. Great doorway into the book. You know what I mean? A great way to enter into the book, to have that as first. I know as a poet, like I've actually stressed out a lot about how to order poems in a book, you know, but you chose beautifully with that one. I loved that opening poem.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Does anyone want to, your time's flying too quickly, but any other questions that people would like to ask? Just unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
I keep saving the chat because I don't think I'm catching all of the great comments.
So I just thank you for organizing. Thank you, Emmy. I love hearing you read. And when the book came out, like I was in Michigan, so it was like, it reminded me of Poem from the Valley. So it's like all these reminders, I pictured myself there, and all these moments and all these kind of like signposts that you have. But I think going back to your discussion of like your relationship with the river and that changing relationship, I'm interested in hearing you talk more about how you represent or how you reflect these moments of violence that the border is built on and that the valley is built on, right? Like the valley is built on a very violent history, yet it's such a lively place, right? It's a place of life, of culture, of so much syncretic stories. And I think I was looking at Green Light Go again when you were talking about that, because like I could go to the other poems like, you know, Not One More Refugee or Left After Crossing, things like that. But in Green Light Go, you have To Be a Bolt Loosened from the Border Wall. So even there in this beautiful poem that's kind of, I pictured driving around, which is what you do in the valley. That's all you can do because it's so hot sometimes, right? You see all these things, and even in this drive, this like moment of violence is still there. So I just, yeah.
Yeah, what was the exact question again? I lost it. Yeah, I got
Sorry.
enjoying. No, I was enjoying everything you were saying.
So how do you reflect, especially now, right? Thinking about like all the headlines, like the one that you mentioned, right? These images of violence that are hyper,
Right.
just too much.
Yes.
Like how do you reflect on that, and how do you use that in your work?
I think that it's always an ethical question. You know, it's always, I mean, like, you know, the book goes out into the world and not everybody has been here to the valley to know what you know, for example, because you grew up here. And in Reynosa, I know. And so you know this land, you know, so well, but so many people don't, and they just know it through those headlines. And yeah, and I think that, you know, I can't ignore the violence, right? I can't ignore, and I can't ignore that I don't like the border wall and what it represents and the militarization and how people are forced to go into more dangerous land in order to try to make it around it. And, you know, I don't like any of that. I can't ignore it, but at the same time, it is a really difficult ethical question about how to represent that in the book. And you know, I even have a regret. Like I always tell people to cross out a line that I wrote, and I can't find it right now. And it was about, it was in the really long poem, Rio Bravo Grande. And it was something that I added at the last minute. It wasn't there from the beginning, and I just don't ever add anything at the last minute before your book goes to press. And so it's on page 45. And yeah, I said, I can't even read it because I crossed it out, but it has coyotes in the line. And I really regret sort of, and I'm trying to get my press to take it out. Like if I can get another edition and I think they said I could do it if it's like a factual, and I think that that's factually, you know, I was sort of like blaming coyotes for sexual violence against immigrants, when really, as I know that a lot of it has to do with like the drug cartels and all of those, you know, various very complicated things that I have not researched enough to know about. And that line was never there. Like I was only thinking about how when immigrants are detained, what can happen sometimes to the women, you know, that goes unreported. And it's the same with all sorts of, you know, police officers and all of that culture of what happens to women when they're detained. And I threw that in at the last minute, and I so regret it. So if you all have a pencil, like, or a pen, cross it out. I remember when, I don't know if Robin's still here, when I went to go visit in Corpus Christi to present this book to all these wonderful high school students, I asked them all simultaneously to cross out that line because I hate it. And I hate that I wrote it. And so, yeah, I think your question makes me think about that, the ethics of it. And especially now, you know, with this presidency, I didn't write it with this presidency in mind, and how immigrants are being vilified right now and have been vilified for the past 4 years is horrifying. And I don't want to participate in that at all. And so, but I can't not mention the things that I worry about. Like I worry about what happens to women, immigrants especially. And we can never know all of their stories. How will we ever know? So there's that. And then the Not One More Refugee Death. I felt like in writing this piece, the last one, I attended a an organized event here in the Valley that was called Not One More Refugee Death. And so the note at the end honors that event. And I was just sort of documenting what I felt the community was expressing about this sad death. You know, the young man had made it across the river and died of heat exposure, apparently. And it's just like so horrifying and sad. It doesn't represent the Valley, but if I can't not write about something that the community mourned. And I thought it was important to show that the community does care and the community does mourn these deaths that happen in our community, because all people see are the headlines that don't really reflect what the community thinks about what's happened, but it's more like this shocking thing. And so, and then with the border wall, the loosening, I can't, you know, I'm always thinking about the wall. I'm just so mad about it. And it's not the biggest of the problems of all the problems that are here, but it represents everything that's wrong about the over-militarization of this beautiful place. And the vilifying of immigrants and of refugees is just heartbreaking. And it's gotten worse since this book. And I thought it was the worst it was gonna be. Okay, I'm talking quite a bit. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but.
You do. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's what I love about your book. Like I mentioned in the comments that I taught it, as you know, I taught the collection, and students can see that struggle, that pain of naming it, but also not knowing not to exploit it. And how do you balance that out when you have to name something that's so violent and so visceral? Like you have a visceral reaction to these headlines, but finding that balance, and you do it beautifully. So thank you.
Thank you for teaching the work. I appreciate it.
Well, that was a beautiful discussion and a very interesting and important one. And I wish we could keep going on. It's such a rich collection, Emmy. It brings up so many wonderful questions and just the beginnings of really important conversations like this one we just had at the end. We are after 8:30, so just in the honor of time, I think we'll have to kind of slowly but surely wrap it up. Blake, what do you think? I mean, does anyone have a burning question that they have to ask before we close? Just to make sure. Okay. We're getting a lot of really wonderful comments in the chat. I think you are extremely wonderful to have tonight, Emmy.
Thank you.
And the good news is she's back, everyone, on August 5th. She's going to do, she's our featured author for the month of the Big Texas Read. She's going to be back in 2 weeks. Please join us. We're going to have a mystery moderator yet to be announced. But we will be able to hear more about her poetry world. We'll be talking more about an anthology she was a part of called Imanaman, a wonderful anthology of Latinx voices. And she'll be able to talk more about this book as well. So just join us in 2 weeks. Just thanks to Writing Workshops Dallas. This has been a great collaboration, Blake. And thanks to David Levinson for making the kind of cooking all of this up. We are having a wonderful time, and this is keeping me going during these really, really, really unprecedented times. So thanks, everyone, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. And Emmy, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you all so much. I'm saving the chat so I can read it right after we get off. Thank you for the comments. I'm sorry if I didn't get to address all the questions, but thank you for being here and spending time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emmy.
Thank you, Emmy.
You're amazing.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Yeah, bye, Emmy. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.
See you on the 5th.
Stay around, Sheila.
Oh, I'll stay for a minute. That was so wonderful. Oh, I needed this. I was exhausted, and I thought I gotta and then I got on, and this was fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Emmy, it was so great to hear you read.
Thank you. Well, who's saying that? I can't see.
Sheila.
It's Sheila.
I'm looking at it. Oh, there you are. You were behind the chat screen.
I love the book, but hearing you read was just